What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Kevin Moore Show. Now, if you want to stay up to date with all my latest videos, just click that subscribe button below, as it really helps to support the show. If you're new to the show, I interview guests from a spiritual perspective, covering mainstream and alternative subjects and much more. Now, on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Mark Fiorentino. Now, Mark will share his views on how the universe really works, based on his study and research of Einstein's unified field theory. He'll discuss how the applications of Einstein's theory can be used to travel through space, renewable energy, future technology, and much more. Mark Fiorentino, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on your show today. I appreciate it.
Well, Mark, it's great to have you on. And, you know, we're going to get into your story just to begin with. And, you know, you started out in electronics. That was something that was near and dear to my heart as well. I believe initially on this journey that you've been on, you started out in computer repair.
All kinds of stuff. I started out with electronics and computer, actually research development at Harris Government Systems as a technician. I helped on many projects there. Then I moved to IBM, troubleshooter, card test, all electronic circuitry, no power kind of stuff of that nature. It's all electronics and computers. In my later years, I did do some work locally for IT department where you would fix computers and stuff. That was just to keep me here close to home, and that worked out well, paid the bills. And so I loved electronics and I loved computer programming. I did a lot of that as well.
The leap that you've gone from electronics to what we're about to discuss is a massive leap. And we'll get more into that as well. I think just as well, it's good just to touch on your the beginnings for you as well, because obviously, you know, your book leads into the discussion of ufology. Did you always have, from childhood, a sort of, you know, desire to look into the unseen in a sense?
Yeah, it started with my love and appreciation of Einstein, which got me into physics when I found that I was born on his birthday. Many years ago, when I was a child, 10 years old, I got into him, and then I read about the unified field theory. And from that moment on, I said, this is the best idea I've ever heard. I want to learn more about that. And I got into science, and especially physics and astronomy, which then led me into UFOs. That was going on heavy back in the 60s and 70s. And I'm thinking, well, hey, if anybody knows about the unified field theory, it's going to be extraterrestrials, because obviously they've got some sort of an anti-gravity thing going. So I was reading books to learn about the anti-gravity. Any clues I could dream or draw from those books, I was looking into. And then that led me to the magnetic field link into anti-gravity. But for many years, I had no idea why a magnetic field would create an anti-gravity field. But yeah, I definitely got an early start, 10 years old, with Einstein and unified field theory, and then it just kept building from there. It was a hobby. I never thought it would actually turn into a book. That was many, many years later. But that's basically how I got into it. And electronics actually, yeah, electronics actually linked in too, because when I was studying electronics, I was starting to imagine in my mind how the electrons are moving in the wire. So I started thinking about particle motion.
That's exactly how I used to think about it. You know, oh my God, I think to myself even now, just while we're doing this interview, for people who have no electronics background, right, and they come into this world with all the gadgets that are now, it must seem, you know, to comprehend how it actually works without the science background there, it must seem pretty daunting. I think that's what led me into electronics, because it was like, well, how is this actually working? Where's the science? Do you know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
Even though
Definitely.
all those years of doing so much electronics, and I never used it in the end. I actually did a degree in television in the end, which is completely different, right? It's on the other end
Oh, wow.
of the screen, right? And
No,
I,
that's amazing.
yeah, it's a crazy jump, right? But I've forgotten so much of my training, because you know when you don't use it, you kind of lose it, right? But
Mhm.
you know,
Right.
and I look at what you've done here with this book. You've almost become a theoretical physicist on your own, in a sense. And would you say that's true, or am I sort of out my depth saying that?
No, you're right. I mean, I classify myself as a metaphysician, which is a philosopher, and philosophers really, they started the whole physics thing. You know, the first physicists were really philosophers mainly. And so as a metaphysician, I studied the nature of things, which got me into physics. There's no way around that, especially since that's where Albert Einstein was, which then led me into mathematics somewhat, even though I don't particularly think of myself as a great mathematician or anything, but I did study the math I needed to study, which means I actually hired physicists to train me on the math that I wanted to use to back up my unified field uh, theory, basically, which is what I'm working on right now, a final paper to upload to journals and so forth, which is going to demonstrate the origin of mass, gravity, and inertia. So yeah, I did get into physics. I won't say reluctantly. It's just somewhere I had to go in order to explain things and to write this book. So I did a great deal of research, and yeah, you can call me an amateur physicist, maybe. You can say
Yeah,
that.
okay, an amateur physicist, and that's sort of inspiring for others that want to go down that road as well. Because obviously, to do that type of work, it takes years and years of study, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I was always studying, looking for things in particular that would match my, I don't want to say my ideas, what I thought was the true path for getting to the unified field theory. So I studied history of physics a lot. Maxwell and Einstein and Lorentz and Newton and Faraday and all these guys, because they were all essentially on the same path. And now, how did all that really become wrong? It's not wrong. So I continue to study physics for fun and enjoyment, and it wound up leading to a book, which took me 4 years to write. Where there was a lot of research. Thank you, internet, for that, because that is a powerful tool, and when properly utilized, you can make great strides in research which would be extremely difficult, like in Einstein's time when there was just libraries and stuff, and you had to rely on a lot of manual moving about and going into the libraries. Very time consuming and very limited in what you could pull up. But it's a lot different with the internet. The power of the internet made a big difference in writing this book.
Okay. Well, there's going to be some tough questions. There's going to be some easy questions. All right. So let's just go straight to the unified field theory. What is that in a nutshell?
Yeah, that's the thing that Einstein was very interested in, and it was a great idea. And quite simply, it's this: electromagnetism and gravity emerge as aspects of a single fundamental field. It's just that simple. Now, you can get a lot bigger explanations and you will become confused. Even some physicists might get confused. But the main original idea from Einstein was really that somehow the electromagnetism, that force, basically generated gravity somehow, or in some way. They're related. They had to be related somehow. So I continued on Einstein's path, and I deconstructed electromagnetism and said, basically, there's three primary forces: the electrostatic field, the magnetic field, and the gravitational field. So then with that, redefining that in my book, basically, I figured out that these three fields are nothing but bendings of space, different types. And so the unified field theory is just figuring out how a electrostatic field makes a magnetic field, and it does, by the way. And then how the electromagnetic field, which are all particles are made of, can somehow generate mass, gravity, and inertia. And that's basically the whole scheme. Now there's the other, unified field theory, the one with quantum mechanics. And since that model I've determined was incorrect, I didn't waste much time with it. I didn't try to unify using their method, because if the model's wrong, you'll never come up with the unified field theory or the theory of everything. And so I stuck with the original Einstein version, which is basically electromagnetism and gravity emerge as aspects of a single fundamental field. That fundamental field I researched, found, and it's called the ether. And I go into a lot of detail in the book to explain that the ether is real. We should never have abandoned that. And I had to go and correct the errors in history where that's concerned. So that's basically what unified field theory is, just combining electromagnetism in a way that allows us to figure out how to generate gravity, mass, and inertia.
And why is that important?
It's the theory of everything. It's the holy grail of physics. If you know that, then you really understand how this universe physically works. And then there's many applications, because he who first figures out gravity, the man or woman who does that, then is going to understand that, oh, well, if gravity is nothing more than a contraction of space, then antigravity, which is a very useful thing to have, is an expansion of space. So then you go back and you say, I know how the Lord God makes gravity. Now I'm going to say, how can I use the same thing, which is particles and forces, to generate an anti-gravity field? And so that's where the big use is. You got to learn gravity. You got to understand gravity before you can go to anti-gravity. And that was always the big secret deal in my mind. I wanted to know how anti-gravity works so that we could build starships.
And do you think that's the most important message of your book so far?
There's a lot of important messages in that book. Basically, probably the most important message is that in my research, which included NDEs, near-death experiencers, querying or researching them, looking for clues as to how the universe was created and worked, which I got plenty of information there. The biggest thing I discovered, for sure, which I always suspected was true, was that God, the creator, whatever name you want to give him, is the creator of this entire universe, the superverse, all the universes beyond ours, all the dimensions, all of it is a part of God. And that's the big message, and that basically science and religion now need to merge, because the source of all the laws of science and physics comes from the creator. It just wasn't a random thing that happened. And there's plenty of evidence, if you can take into consideration near-death experiencers and what they've said many times over. God, Jesus, whoever they talk to, Buddha, tells them God created this universe. There's no doubt. And I know for sure there's an afterlife. There are, spirits, guardian angels, and so forth. It's not a belief I'm saying here. I'm talking about knowledge, truth. And it's there somewhat in this book, but then in the next book, I'm going to hit that point very hard, because there's a lot of connections to me and the spirit realm that guided me to do this, to write this first book.
Okay, and what is some of that connection, do you think? Could you sum it up at all?
Well, I could go at least 30 minutes telling you all the connections, because they're basically coming from a for fun thing when I was 20 years old with a psychic that indirectly revealed something very important about my future. This particular psychic said a lot of things that all came true, but said something to a friend of mine that also went in and had a reading with this lady. And he told me in the car afterwards that I was going to, and I can't remember the exact words he said, because this is like 40 years ago. And he said, you're going to become famous for discovering something or writing a book, and that just kind of lingered in my mind for the rest of my life. But I really didn't know what it was I was going to do. And, I tried inventing things, and that never really worked out. But as I became aware that, hey, there's psychics that really have a gift, and they can talk to the other side. And if you can talk to the other side, anyone you talk to there is like a direct link to God, because they're all connected, and they'll tell you that. NDEs, real psychic mediums, they'll say they're all connected. When you pass away, you're connected there, and you have access to all the information you need. So anything you can get from the other side is incredibly valuable knowledge and wisdom that is not on this earth anywhere. It's rock solid information that you can get. So I've had many experiences that proved to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were talking to people on the other side. So that's basically, there's this whole undercurrent going on as going through my life, just kind of laying in the back of my mind. I'm aware of it. Psychic after psychic kept saying the same thing. And like I said, in the next book, I'm going to write it all up, because there's a lot there. It's a hell of an interesting story. And there's a lot of cosmic connection I have.
Interesting. And yes, like there's good mediums, good psychics. There's also not so good as well. And I guess it depends
Right? I've met a few of those too.
Yeah, it depends what abilities they've got and whether they're really tuning into something of a higher nature, or whether it's useful, practical information that they're given as well. But let's not get too into that right now. That's another book, right? So,
Okay.
how much does mainstream science agree with your position right now? Would you say it completely disagrees?
Mainstream science is quantum mechanics. I went with Einstein. Einstein always had a problem with quantum mechanics, saying it was incomplete, and he's right. It is. It's a theory that has many practical applications. And if you want to smack particles together and figure out what new particles you can make, quantum mechanics math is great for that. It's all probabilities and so forth. but you can't really tell how anything works, how the mechanics is missing in quantum mechanics, basically. So I use classical mechanics, the same kind of math and belief system and philosophical system that Albert Einstein had, Maxwell had, Newton had, Faraday had, Lorentz had. That's the dream team. And there's no way you're going to tell there's anybody today that can match those guys. So I'm on their side, their team, basically. And in my mathematical scheme and in my theoretical scheme, I use classical mechanics, and that's all that was ever needed to solve this problem. So yeah, we don't really agree, but I'll cross that bridge when I get to it, when I start going on scientific shows and things of that nature. There's going to be some heavy discussions for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big problem, I guess, that the work that you've done obviously is against the theories that are out there. And then, one has to say, well, okay, how would this ever be looked at from a mainstream level, and what is there to be got basically from the work that you've done? But I guess that's been a something that's been in the back of your mind for a long time as you've gone down this road, but you've continued down it. So I think it's important just to say that none of what you're saying is credible in the eyes of mainstream science, but it's interesting to look at it from another perspective.
I wouldn't say it's not credible, because I use classical mechanics, which is taught in schools. But what they don't believe is that method, that philosophy, will lead to the solution for the theory of everything, or the unified field theory. So yeah, they know about it. They understand what I'm saying, and some will have an open mind and will listen. I've had that happen, and I continue to have that happen. And there's others that say, no, that's wrong. You can't think that way. You can't think about it that way. And so, yeah, there is a chasm.
Is any of what you've put out there been tested in any sort of way practically?
Yeah, it's not a matter of so much testing, it's a matter of interpretation. There's been a great deal of misinterpretation of experiments. And those misinterpretations have led us down the rabbit hole into quantum mechanics. And so inertia is a test of what I'm saying. The fact that we can go into outer space and accelerate a rocket and it feels exactly like gravity, what are you interacting with? Well, in my theory, it's the space, which is the same thing as the ether. That's the only thing that's out there that you're traveling through. So there's a lot of experiments, but it's just you've got to interpret the results properly so that you understand what's really happening, the mechanics of this universe.
I just wanted to get that out there because, no one's after misleading anyone, right? And I know you put a lot of time into this, and I know that people get excited when you come on because of what we're about to talk about, but we have to, keep it
Right.
in the level that we're at right now with science as well. And just, we can't ignore
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go straight into what you were mentioning there, the ether, the foundation of reality, as you call it.
Yeah. That the ether was abandoned in the year 1905 for a couple of reasons mainly. And in the book, I go into the details of why that happened. Now, there was an experiment done, the Michelson-Morley experiment, which was designed to detect the ether wind. Basically, as the Earth traveled through outer space, they figured there was going to be, we could detect its motion relative to the ether wind. And they designed an experiment using light, photons, and bouncing them off mirrors and going at right angles and timing each direction. And they do it at different times of the year until they were looking for a slight difference in the speed of light in one direction versus another. Figuring, well, the Earth is moving so much in this direction, we should get some resistance. There should be a slight timing difference, which was never detected. It's called the null result. And everybody jumped on the bandwagon and it said, there's no ether wind Therefore, we don't believe in the ether. Now, Einstein was monitoring that. Believe it or not, he was on board. He was aware of Michelson and his experiments, which were a good 5 years before he released special relativity in 1905. And so he was aware that Michelson and Morley were getting a null result. So he wrote Special Relativity, released it in 1905, and basically disavowed the ether, which then really triggered an avalanche. Hey, he's got an explanation here with these transformations that explains things speed relative to one another. But he's also saying he doesn't need an ether to do this. With that, it was a 1-2 punch that knocked the ether right out. So I had to go back and find out what went wrong in that experiment. When I did, then I went and discovered, I suspected, because Einstein deliberately wrote things in the special relativity saying, oh, I don't need the ether and so forth and so on. I said, wait a minute, you must have known something before you wrote that. And I was able to reveal that there was some speeches he made afterwards where he admitted that he knew in advance. So it was, it was kind of like a sleight of hand that he pulled so that people would believe his theory was correct. Even though the mathematics that was in special relativity was generated using an ether model. Both he and Lorentz had an ether model in mind, and they were like shocked when this null result came. But after many years of research, I found that it was a very simple reason why the ether wasn't detected. And that's because they use photons to determine, to measure the, the ether wind. What they didn't realize, and what Einstein wound up putting in his paper, is that photons, light particles, always travel at the same speed. So there was no way in hell that experiment could ever detect an ether wind, because the motion of the particle of a photon comes from the photon itself internally. So no external, if you're on an emitting source that's moving and then you fire your flashlight ahead of you, it's not this, the speed of light isn't the flashlight light speed plus how fast the flashlight is moving. That's irrelevant. It's the speed of light that comes out of that flashlight, no matter how fast it's moving in any direction. Its speed is independent of any other motion, reference frame of motion. So they didn't know that. They didn't really ever comprehend that deeply enough to understand that, oh, well, we didn't detect an ether wind, not because it's not there. It was a bad design of experiment. That experiment will never detect the ether wind. You would have to use particles that have mass in order to do that. So you could probably detect the ether wind using the CERN accelerator, the circular ring, timing the particles. I'll guarantee you, December, January timeframe, that there'll be timing problems in the east and west tunnels. But that's because those particles, the motion of those being slung around that ring is coming externally from the particle, the magnetic field or whatever they're using to push it around. So that kind of thing can detect the ether wind, because that motion is not independent of the motion of the emitting source or the receiver. So if they wanted to look there, that might be a place they could start looking, but you can't use a photon to do it. So there's lots of evidence for the ether. Inertia is a proof of the ether.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've interviewed. Well, I know I have a guy that did the Electric Universe, based in Australia, and I'm sure his was based on the ether as well. I think we went into some.
It keeps coming back.
Discussion about it. Yeah. How many revisions of this book did you have to do in order to get it so that anyone can pick this book up, which they can, and they don't need a science background to sort of understand it as well?
I finished it in about a year and then spent 3 years rewriting it, at least 10 times each chapter. I would rewrite it and say, I could say that better. I can say that clearer. And I would rewrite it again and again. And I had editors look at it. Then I had another editor look at it. And then I had it proofread. I hammered away at this thing.
Yeah, I'm only saying that because I just want to make sure that, I want to, say that anyone that's listening to this or watching this right now, I know it sounds kind of complicated to us non-science people, but actually the book goes into an easy to digest read, basically.
Yeah. I try to do it very easily, and I mark areas that are too technical. You can skip over if you want. I wrote this book for the layman. That's where I had to start here to get the people aware. It's basically simple stuff, but it gets complicated because there's many layers of explanation.
Well, we're talking about the speed of light there then. Why can nothing travel beyond the speed of light then?
Well, it's determined. James Clerk Maxwell discovered way back when the speed of light, c, equals 1 over the square root of permittivity times permeability. And so what is permittivity and permeability? They're properties of space. So there's more evidence for you. If space has properties, then space can't be a void, empty void made of nothing, because nothingness doesn't have properties of permittivity and permeability. And permittivity is kind of the way electric field has to do with how the electric field builds and in space, and permeability has to do with the magnetic field and how it builds and moves through space. I would say that both of these two things provide an impedance to the maximum value. If you change these values, and it can be done, you will increase or decrease the speed of light. So basically, this has been known for 2-3 centuries now. That's why the speed of light is limited. And Maxwell discovered this by computing it. And they were fortunately able to make measurements to determine permeability and permittivity back in that time. And he realized that this had to do with the electrostatic and the magnetic field. And he realized that a photon is an electromagnetic device. So it's moving through a medium, and that medium is described with these two properties, permittivity and permeability, which have to do with a certain density of space. And since the ether is a quasi-elastic solid, and solid in this case means that which is continuous. That's the key word that you must think of. This material is continuous. It's not made of parts. It cannot be divided. It is a continuous material. It's quasi-elastic, quasi meaning that if you stretch it, and once you remove the force that's stretching it, it'll snap back into place. And elastic means it can be bent, the form slightly. So that's what we're dealing with here. And there's so much evidence to prove that exists.
Look at some of the materials that were talked about being recovered from the Roswell craft, where they could, crumble the material and it would go back to its original form. They couldn't dent this material. They couldn't burn it. It was indestructible, they talked about.
Well, yeah, there's some people that claim that you opened up a nice little can of worms. Let's go into that a little bit further. Some of these crash sites, people are claiming that they're getting a special type of material from this craft. It's called a metamaterial. Have you ever heard of that? A left-handed material or metamaterial?
Yes, they've talked about that, haven't they? When they talk about some of the top scientists talk about
right.
How do these tic tacs maybe travel and what are they made of?
Well, what's the key thing that metamaterials do? Well, very few people know, unless you're a material scientist or a physicist. Right now, they're in the news, but not in the mainstream news because they don't care about this. But people who are interested in what metamaterials can do is that they adjust, guess what? The permittivity and permeability. So they can adjust it by constructing this, using this material, and they can reduce it. So now doesn't that kind of make sense? that they can reduce permittivity and permeability with metamaterials. And isn't that going to make that craft go through space a lot faster? Because if you look at that formula and you start reducing the values for permittivity and permeability of free space, the speed of light goes up. And if you reduce it to 0, which these guys are claiming they've done on Earth here in labs in China and other places, they're saying that when they shine light in this material, it goes infinitely fast. So it certainly makes sense that UFOs would be made of a metamaterial. That doesn't surprise me at all.
I mean, there's me saying that you can't, destroy this material. Yet we've got a craft in Roswell that crashed unless it was gifted to us. No one understands how it, obviously came down. Now, one thing they talk about when people have been close to these, I'll call it UFOs, right, is the hum sound. Obviously, then with the crop circles, you've got the way that the crops are bent in ways they can't explain. There's disruptions in the mechanics of the electrics of a car. I'm sure you've got answers to these.
Right. Yeah. The hum, I've always looked for that because that's telling me that something to do with the magnetic field is happening. You can create a hum, an audible hum, if the frequencies are below 20 kilohertz and you're turning magnets on and off, or you're spinning, somehow you're rotating them by turning one on, then off, then the next one on and off. So you're making the magnetic field move by turning the magnets on and off if they're in a circular pattern. So what you would get is a crop circle that's bent with the crop bent either clockwise or counterclockwise. And that would explain that the magnetic field is like whooshing around or swirling around while they're in the hover mode, which again makes sense to me. If you do it, 100, 200, 300 times a second, that's going to make a nice hovering mode of operation for a UFO. And if you have any metal or metallic substances in the area, they're going to vibrate and they'll hum, and you'll hear that. And I would expect that the time that you would hear that most is when they're hovering or they're moving very slowly. When they're up to full speed, they use a different mode of projecting the magnetic field. They use a gradient field shape that is probably turned hard on all the way across the craft and creates a vortex-like shape, like this, basically where space expands. Let me get it here. So the little tip, the point is where the magnetic field is lowest. At the other end, where it gets wide, it's the strongest magnetic field. And space is literally stretching apart as you create this magnetic field. The stronger the field, the more space stretches apart, the more permittivity and permeability drop because the density drops at this end right here. Much less density than over here, this end. And so, yeah, you're going to hear hum on hovering UFOs, especially the ones that are not as advanced as the ones, let's say they're 2,000 or 3,000 years ahead of us. Those are going to be pretty primitive. They're going to be very simple designs. They're going to be shaped like cigar shapes and saucer shapes and maybe triangle shapes. The more complex the design, the more advanced the species. So yeah, I can explain the hum, why it's interfering with the electronics in cars, because you're inducing, with those strong magnetic fields, you're going to interrupt the current flow in the wires of the automobile. You're going to interrupt the electronics. It's going to get nasty if you're really close. Well, there's loads of evidence basically that people, in some cases physicists, have examined photographs like the photograph of the triangle, the triangle in the Norwegian area, and I can't think of a Belgian triangle. There was somebody in the 1980s who took a picture of one. They were fairly close to the UFO, And they analyzed the picture, a physicist, and he said, yeah, it's legitimate, it hasn't been altered or anything. And he noticed something in the emulsion of the photograph. He noticed that the emulsion, the silver halide crystals, I think, were magnetized. There was other people like the Air Force who basically did their research, and they would take magnometers to UFO landing sites. And one of them measured some blades of grass where the UFO landed, and the grass was magnetized. There's all evidence providing that the UFOs use high magnetics to somehow cancel and gravity to create a gravitational shield, and for propulsion as well.
Do you think some of these tic tacs, do you think some of these sightings that are coming on mainstream news right now, do you think some of them could be as that it somehow we've been able to reverse technology something, and this could be potentially our test that we're running against our own military?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are thinking that. I mean, that's the first thing I actually thought when this happened was, I bet you those are ours. They're very basic, simple shapes. The only thing that would make me think they're not ours is because they went underwater and to an island off the Mexican coast. So there seems to be an underwater base there, unless we're, in cahoots with the aliens who most definitely have underground bases all over the world.
Say we're not in cahoots, right? And say that we really do not understand what this is, right? Even say
Right.
that the Roswell incident did happen and we can't even barely understand it, even with today's technology still, right? Are we ready to have that type of technology, and all we're going to do with it is weaponize it, aren't we?
I think that's why the U.S. denies it, because what does that do for us if we have anti-gravity technology? Well, we own the skies. And if we own the skies, we have a strategic military advantage. Yeah, you want to keep that secret.
If a hot war really took place, and God forbid it does, would and just say it did, and nothing like that was winning the war in a sense. Do you know what I mean? That none of that technology was out there helping. Then it was all just a farce that we never had it in the first place. I mean, I'm hypothesizing there, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
easy to say, isn't it? Oh yeah, we've got it, but do we?
I can't say for sure because I've never seen it personally, but I have talked to people who have seen a UFO up close. Unfortunately, this person does not want to be known. So he convinced, oh,
It's not credible then.
I was convinced. Yeah, well, it's not credible, but the guy, all I could do is say that they've seen one up close and it had our markings on it.
Okay. And we just hope that guy's telling you the truth. And but it,
Well,
we've
what can you do with any of that stuff, really? Yeah. Yeah, there's, it's a personal experience. It's, not backed up with any photographs. Even if it was, you can rig photographs, you can rig video. At some point, you can talk yourself out of any evidence you want to talk yourself out of. Unless you see it yourself personally, you don't know for sure.
well, even if you
There'll
do see
always
it,
be
yeah, but
some
even
doubt.
if you do see it personally, it's beyond your understanding and conceptualization of even what you've seen. You may have seen something, but would it really affect your day-to-day living afterwards? Unless it's an abduction, I guess. But would it really make that much of a difference, to the bills?
Not to the bills. It's just if you care enough about what's really going on, like in that old movie, Close Encounters, the guy was obsessed with finding out what was really going on. He wanted to understand what was real, what was true. And for those kind of people, it'll stick with you for the rest of your life. The other people who are just watching American Idol and stuff like that, they could care less.
No, I mean I've had an experience with the whole family did, and it was an incredible experience. But uh, what's it really done? Curious, probably curiosity. Um,
Yeah,
but you know, I suppose I always think to myself, we are not spiritually ready for such engagement. Do you know what I mean? On a mass level, but that's just me.
yeah. There's a lot of people that think it'll create great panic if we were to, if the U.S. government were to come out and say, "Oh, there's UFOs, there's aliens. Some are peaceful and some are not," blah blah blah. Then the media could run with that any way they wanted, and they could create great chaos, or they could act responsibly and calm people down and saying, "Look, they've been here for centuries, millennia, and no wars have come out. We haven't had to fight aliens anywhere, really, except for one little tiny battle in Vietnam. I don't know of any battling going on, no declaration of war, no nothing and in many cases now UFOs are coming out and they're healing people. They're healing people in pretty large numbers. So if anything, it's been of benefit.
That
And
is also
certainly if
that.
we
Mhm. That is also true. I just want to say that most abductions, that when they've gone back over them in years to come, they do say that actually, they felt that they were being helped. Most of them.
yeah, well, I guess there's something to be said if you're an advanced species, you got there because you didn't wipe yourself out. You've learned from your mistakes, or you don't have the emotional background like humans do, who are very emotional beings, who do a lot of good and a lot of evil. And there's a lot of controversy about us and how we handle things and so forth. But the aliens that I've heard about and read about seem to be much more pragmatic. They're explorers, researchers, and a lot of them are very spiritually connected, because if you take our species, if assuming we don't destroy each other in some way, in some titanic battle at some point, if we go another 1,000 years, 2,000, 10,000 years, we're going to be very spiritually advanced. There's going to be psychics is going to be psychic mediums are going to be a very common thing, because we're evolving and that part of our brain is evolving. And so that's just the way, if you've taken a being that's a million, 2 million, 10 million years ahead of us, they're going to be very psychically evolved as well, not just technologically evolved.
I think what you're talking
So,
about is a bigger understanding of their place in the cosmos, and really what they're working on behalf of, which may be this energy of the all that is, this, someone would call it God, the universe, whatever it is. And that it's from that space where maybe we become, uh, creators of a of some other civilization out there in the future. Do you know what I mean? Planning your own type of Earth, and seeing life sprout in different containers. Like maybe it's not the human body that we would recreate, or maybe it is. Maybe we would go out there to help other places to for souls to come in to at a more basic level. And I don't know. Who knows?
right. Yeah. Well, you don't know those deep questions. You don't know until you really get to the other side, or you get taken aboard a spacecraft and they explain it to you, or you have a near-death experience. Those people get that kind of information. They get that kind of knowledge. And it's just up to us whether we believe them or not.
With this type of technology that or this the theories that you're proposing here as well, where does power, basic things like power generation, come into your work? I mean,
Yeah, they need a device, let's say the size of a basketball, that could generate several megawatts of power. Uh, Maybe 4 or 5, or maybe 10 or 20. You need a lot of current, a lot of electricity going through these superconducting coils, which is another technology you need in order to build a UFO. And you need to supply this continuously. There could be no drop, no pause, especially once you go above light speed, and it'd be fatal. So yeah, the power source is a problem I'm still working on and thinking about, but apparently that problem has been solved. And if we're building them and we have them now, we probably reverse engineered whatever it is that they discovered and are using. I have my ideas, but I don't know if they're right or not. I suspect that people have created inventions. I know some people who told me that who worked in departments of patents offices and such, that especially for the power company, that they own patents that would change the world. They just simply do not implement that technology. So there may be some perpetual motion machines out there that generate power, which is kind of where I'm thinking what would be needed for a UFO, some sort of a power generating device that's using some sort of magnetic system, high-speed magnetic rotational system that's generating the power necessary. The faster you spin a magnet around a coil, the more voltage, the more amperage, the more power you get, and you need a lot of power. So that means whatever this thing is spinning very fast and generating huge wattage.
Maybe what I should be asking is, well, what is the practical applications? Forget UFOs and all that, right? What's the practical applications of some of the theories that you're coming up with?
Well, the practical, I really stress the anti-gravity, because there's so many things that you can do. You build the supercar, which is a car basically that it's a hovercraft, and it can go up to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 miles an hour, which means you can get to anywhere on the planet within a matter of minutes. Very convenient, very helpful in many ways. You could build drones that go into take things into outer space at a very, very low cost. If I want to lift a 500-pound object into outer space, it'll cost us probably $20 million to build the rocket and to push that thing up into outer space, whereas you could load it on one of our interstellar planetary transport systems or whatever, and it could be just lifted right up using the anti-gravity, no fuel, none of all the technology and everything that would be required, all the personnel to build the rocket and to put it into outer space. It's a very expensive way to explore space. If you have the supercar and the anti-gravity technology, you could build, we could go to other planets and establish colonies. There's a lot of things we could do. We could put up all kinds of great satellites at very low cost. We could travel across the world. You could have the super ambulance, an ambulance basically that can get to where it's going in a matter of a minute or less. It won't have to negotiate traffic lights. It could just go up and straight to where it's got to go and then come right down. So if it takes 5 minutes to get to your house with an ordinary ambulance, you can do it probably in less than a minute with a super ambulance. You could build transports that could take supplies to across the world in an emergency situation, whereas it would take days to get the materials there. You could load these transports and be there in a matter of minutes, certainly not more than 2 or 3 hours, however long it takes to load up a transport. I could think of many, and there's, I'm sure, more things that can be done with the anti-gravity propulsion technology or the slipwave bias drive.
Now, I know we've not got too much into your technical side of your work. It's mainly because I guess the science side of it, I don't get. I'm it's not my forte, and I would prefer to have two of you on, where it's someone from the science realm and yourself, sort of debating it in between as well. That'd be fun to host. But I really do appreciate the message that you're and the work that you're putting into what you're doing as well. Do you feel that this legacy that you're leaving with us one day, is that what do you see the future purpose of your work as well? Would you like someone to take up on the work that you're putting out here right now?
I say in the last chapter in my book, I want people to go out improved magnetism can be used to create anti-gravity field. That's the bottom line thing that's got to happen in order for us to evolve, to be a species that goes into and can search to, explore the universe, because you have to go faster than the speed of light. So another thing the slipwave spatial bias drive allows us to do is not just have anti-gravity and go very fast. You can go as fast as you want. So if you want to get to the next star system, Proxima Centauri, in 4.2 light years, it could take you, with a slipwave spatial bias drive, you could get there in 15 or 20 minutes. Now that's practical. And if you want to colonize another planet, you got to be able to get there rapidly in real time, and not, in 4.2 light or 4.2 years or 4,000 years. If we use rockets, it's just not practical. We have to break the light barrier.
Where does time fit into that theory then? Obviously, I mean, we haven't touched upon time travel, but I know you've talked about it before, because it's kind of related, isn't it, to some of the theories that you've put down in this book?
Yeah, it's the beauty. You see, there's so many things that have to work a certain way in order to be able to travel to other stars. If these things all don't work this way that I'm describing, it's useless. So what happens to a person who's going 100 times the speed of light in this starship? Well, one would think that time, going with ordinary science views as they are now, special relativity, time would stop on your spaceship. And that's because your clock is interacting with the space that you're moving through. If that clock is using, that clock is in the spaceship like a rocket ship, it somehow miraculously accelerates to the speed of light. Well, you would have more than a time problem on your hand, but I'll leave all that other Lorentz transformations out. We'll just talk about time dilation and say that your clock would stop. But if you use a spatial bias drive, you change the space that you're traveling through. You bend it in such a way that it allows you to not only go faster than the speed of light, but your clock will run slightly faster than normal. So not only will time not stop, it's really not time stopping, it's the clock stopping. And we're just saying it's time stopping. But in reality, since you've stretched the space, you're inside of a bubble where space is thinned out, permittivity and permeability have been reduced, that clock will run ever so slightly faster. Basically, you will hit what Newton called absolute time, whereas there's one moment that's going at the same rate everywhere in the universe. And when you're in this mode, when you can travel faster than the speed of light, in this mode, time will not slow down, it will not stop. You won't have the twin paradox problem like Einstein described and others. That goes away. It becomes just like traveling like the in Star Trek, where they're zipping around, they're going here and there, and they're coming back. And every time they go to a different star system, Earth hasn't aged 30 years. They're in the same time because they're moving so fast that if it only takes you 10 minutes, your time and Earth's time to get to another star, it's just 10 minutes for everybody and 10 minutes to get back. This is practical. This is the way it has to work if we're going to get beyond our planet Earth. It's got to be designed that way.
Right. Excellent. Okay, well, listen, your website, Mark, is?
www.super-relativity.com.
Well, I've enjoyed having you on, Mark. I'm sorry that I've not been able to keep up with the science side of it, and I wish I could. And it just, I guess I get frustrated sometimes when, I don't understand the subject enough because it's so in-depth and involved in science, which it would be great one day to maybe get someone like yourself on debating with, a mainstream scientist or a physicist. So, but I appreciate you coming on and sharing the message.
Oh, you're welcome. Appreciate it.